national madness. Bring out your dead. Babylon crumbles, as it was said. National madness, national suicide, killing the brothers, things left unsaid, things left unsaid. National madness.
Good day, welcome to my presentation, How Rediscovering a Personal Archive of Conscript Portraits 27 years after the nationalist regime in South Africa led to a life-altering PhD research project. In 2014, I completed a postgraduate course titled Imaging the World in Photographs, convened by Dr. Siona O'Connell and Professor Nick Shepherd. The course focused on photography as a system of representation, one that linked the past, present, and future within South Africa. I included a series of 17 portraits that I had taken as a conscript in the South African Navy in 1990. The portraits were taken during the 3-month basic training phase of national service in the SADF, or South African Defence Force. Although photography was strictly prohibited in the SADF, I somehow persuaded my superiors that a photographic record of the experience would serve the interests of the Navy. As a result, I was allowed to document aspects of the basic training phase at SAS Saldanha Naval Training Base. Dr. Siona O'Connell was fascinated by the series, specifically how the photographs functioned as an archive of a hidden and exclusively white history, and suggested I research the topic further. It's estimated that 600,000 men in all were conscripted from white South African society between 1968 and 1993. This allowed for the evolution of a complex socialized obligation towards conscription, buttressed by an oppressive political and military regime. I discovered that the experience of induction and basic training had not been researched in any great scholarly detail, and rarely moved beyond the anecdotal accounts of ex-conscripts. My findings set in motion a detailed study titled Shadows Asking Echo to Dance, Navigating Ambiguity, How Former Conscripts Between 1980 and 1990 Navigate Memories of Induction into the SADF in Post-Apartheid Society. The study revealed fascinating insights into the effects of systemic militarization within a generation of white South African males. It also contributed fresh insights into the construction of militarized masculinities, memory, and whiteness during the height of the nationalist apartheid state. Nonetheless, in this brief presentation, I would like to focus on my archive of photographs. Although most SADF conscripts did not experience actual combat, basic training undoubtedly marked the first performative rite of passage for white militarized masculinities. During the 1980s, there were 2 intakes annually, one in late January or early February, and another in July. Conscripts usually received their call-up papers by mail or telegram, which would detail the branch of service, the military unit they had been allotted to, and the exact date they were required to report for duty. The duration of national service was 24 months, followed by a further 720 days of part-time duty. Basic training provided an ideal opportunity to cement perceptions that South Africa was a state under siege, effectively at war with communist forces intent on invasion. Once inducted into a military environment, conscripts formed a communal group in which they were all equally separated from society and stripped of their identity by the military ritual of basic training. Decades later, I discovered that my series of conscript portraits functioned as a visual story that countered this ritualistic stripping of identity and the process of manufacturing an obedient, militarized masculinity for the state. Basic training the world over exemplifies the metamorphosis of a boy into a man, yet my simple series of portraits attempted to humanize the individual. It required a silence of almost 3 decades for me to understand why I had embarked on this series of portraits. This was no simple photographic document of conscripts in basic training, but certainly something deeper. On a personal level, the act of recording fellow conscripts was possibly an attempt at negating the loss of identity from a civilian to a military environment that was usually abrupt and even violent. Basic training in the SADF was at times especially brutal and marked by a rupture of the ties to self, family, and social environments. An ex-conscript described basic training as the final molding of the youth into a nationalist style of thought. In this sense, my portraits act as a counter-document to the experience. What struck me on rediscovering the archive was how disturbingly boyish the subjects looked. The images seemed imbued with a childlike sense of naivety and could double as a series of portraits of adolescents in a school environment, such as a boarding school, if it wasn't for the obvious military uniforms. Yet these conscripts are presented as active yet unwilling political agents of the state, in an environment that helped preserve and serve the needs of the white minority. A striking aspect of these photographs is the absence of an obvious military environment. Ex-conscripts described SADF bases as Spartan environments, and in some instances they likened the surroundings to a prison. One ex-conscript described himself as a willing prisoner of the state. In this sense, the military base served as a locale of separation and isolation, both mentally and physically, where a secluded conscript community could be subjected to the stresses of basic training. Yet this is somehow not present in any of the photographs. What these portraits represent is a rare record of adolescents fresh out of high school or university, immersed within the military structures of the nationalist regime. They would emerge from the experience, certainly in the eyes of the military, as men, or more specifically, as soldiers in service of the state. The notion that conscription made men out of boys was a consistent theme of state discourse. Yet, this process also threw up contradictions, and instances of conscript resistance and non-compliance were surprisingly uncommon. On reflection, viewing these portraits almost 3 decades later prompted me to ask questions of my role as an unwitting agent among tens of thousands of other males of the conscription generation, positioned on the wrong side of history. When viewing these portraits, I was drawn to Barth's description of where a photograph is explored not as a question, but as a wound. He quotes, "I see, I feel, hence I notice, I observe, and I think." In this sense, these portraits pose more questions than provide answers and give voice to the oft-silenced plight of not just SADF conscripts, but all young men who are thrust into military environments without the luxury of freedom of choice, whether a First World War British conscript, Second World War German conscript, or an American draftee in the 1960s. These images enjoy a disturbing historical connection with the plight of men who were called to wage war on each other by the state. Sadly, for many of the now fading generations of ex-SADF conscripts, there is a reticence to come to terms with the experience. My PhD research revealed the persistent belief that basic training marked the starting point of a national effort of white males to stem the tide of communism, without which South Africa would have become a Soviet puppet state. Looking to the present, this archive provides a rare glimpse of a period that is oft silenced in South Africa by ex-conscripts themselves and current dominant political discourses. My research hopes that archives of a similar nature from all sectors of society prompt further conversation and storytelling of our past within a humanistic context. Thank you for allowing me to share my visual story with you.
National madness, the beast stalks the land. All I swallow